But I think my favorite one is definitely being a mother. It's both the most rewarding, but also the most challenging job I have ever had, and it's unpaid.
It's not just a casting brief that we have to tick all those boxes for, but what is the action?
How do we bring in other folks to even expand the perspectives that we're sharing, right? So that it is inclusive, so that it is actionable, that it's equitable.
It's not therapy, but it's therapeutic. I'll be very honest.
I think the biggest hangup for the hesitation of why people don't do mentorship is
Welcome to Meaningful Marketing, Mentoring, Mattering with me, Joseph Alcantara. Together, we'll uncover the power of purpose, experience mentorship magic, unpack ways to make a difference, and find transformative journeys as a community. Welcome to another episode of Meaningful Marketing, Mentoring, Mattering with me, Joseph Alcantara. And today we have another inspiring guest. So get ready for this fun, exciting, and insightful conversation. My guest is a systems thinker that has a passion for collaboration between business strategy, technology, and customer experience. With over a decade of professional experience, she has hands on exposure in consumer goods, tourism to B2B, healthcare, and financial industries, working from interactive design, UX, and product to experience strategy and design operations. As an associate director of experience strategy at Digitas, she creates human centered solutions that challenge the status quo and inequities through inclusive thinking. In her free time, she offers mentorship internationally to marginalized groups and first and second generation immigrants trying to break into the UX, CX, and product spaces via adpliss.org. A true, meaningful brand and experience strategist. Please welcome to our show, Kat Richards. Hi, Kat.
hi, how's it going?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm good. Thank you so much for having me on today.
And thank you so much for saying yes. As I was telling you previously when we were chatting, when I saw your profile, when Bernice actually recommended you to also be part of the show, I was like, wow, a marketer, someone who does meaningful things, and someone who's also into mentoring, like checking off all the boxes. So thank you for saying yes.
Yeah, of course. Excited to chat today.
All right, so let's proceed with the first question. What is your meaningful life story from your childhood to your professional experience to where you are today?
Yeah, absolutely. Where to start? I mean, I always start by telling folks that I'm a first gen Chinese immigrant. I was born in Hong Kong, and I moved here when here being Illinois in the Midwest when I was 7, right when Hong Kong was getting returned back to China. And so, like most AAPI individuals growing up with Asian parents, there's really only three choices that you have as a career, right? Like be a lawyer, be a doctor, work with numbers. And that was always hard for me because I've always had a passion for art, right? It was a way for me to express myself in a creative manner. Um, and that did not sit well with my parents. Doing anything with art was like, oh no, she's going to be a poor, like living on the streets. She's not going to make it. And so for me, I went to school with, going for pre law actually. And then I changed it sophomore year to advertising. And then, of course, because I'm an overachiever, I also had a graphic design minor and a psychology minor. And so I think that today I'm able to use those skills interchangeably, which is nice because as a strategist, as a UX person, a lot of what I do is really understanding human behavior, right? And understanding how that applies in advertising. And so that's where the graphic design and the psychology kind of comes into play as well.
That is such a beautiful, origin story, and also how you landed into your profession right now. And a combination of advertising, psychology, design, and focusing on inclusivity is like the perfect mix. But I'm quite interested with how you became so interested with marginalized groups, making sure that they're top of mind when creating marketing solutions for it to be inclusive. How did that come about?
So when you've been at so many different agencies, you start to notice a pattern, which is there's not enough folks that look like us, that come from cultures like us, that think like us with the perspectives that we have, right? In strategy, in creative, in design, in technology, in all those spaces. At least not as much in the Midwest where I am, right? I'm sure that's a lot more common in LA or in New York.
Mhm.
But where I am, that's not as common. And so for me, it's always been the only one asking the hard questions, asking the uncomfortable questions, and then hearing silence because people don't want to talk about it. And so it's been kind of, many years of figuring out how do I approach these questions in the room where I'm the one and only, and how do I ask some of those and make it really uncomfortable sometimes because people have to, people, let's talk about it. Let's get a little uncomfortable so we can get better at what we do. And other times it's okay, let's rephrase the question so that it's not me against them, and it's more so how can we collectively think bigger, think more inclusively so that the solution we're creating, the campaign that we're creating, aligns with more people, it resonates with more people so that we get to the end result, which is, more impressions, more reach, whatever that is.
Mhm. I love how you framed it in such a way that you're there to disrupt, you're there to ask the difficult questions. But I'm sure that it has not been easy because I'm in the same boat. We're in, okay,
Yeah.
we look like this, we're part of various intersectionalities, and asking those difficult questions can definitely be very uncomfortable and difficult sometimes, both on our side and the recipients of those questions. How did you navigate that level of being uncomfortable, but also at the same time being bold to ask those questions? Because I'm sure that as a typical Asian who would have just develop into just be quiet, head down, focus on your work. How did that change, and how did you get into that process of being bold and being aggressive? I can say when it comes to asking those questions.
And that's a great question. I think that I have to thank my grandmother in Hong Kong. She was the one that taught me to be fierce. She was the one that taught me to say, if someone says you have to do this, then it's always why, right?
Mm,
And so I think for me, I don't, I'm surprised to hear the word bold whenever people associate it with me. I think for me, it's just being candid, and having candid conversations with individuals. And sometimes that can come across a little aggressive because I'm so blunt. But it's also building rapport with individuals, right? So it doesn't have to be always in a big group setting where you have those uncomfortable questions and uncomfortable conversations. Sometimes it's also just building allies outside of the meeting rooms so that you know where your safe spaces are, so that you have people to kind of help advocate for this question and have the dialogues.
mhm. Um, I'm happy to hear that you had the support of your grandmother, because for people who had those role models or those family members who've actually developed you to ask the right questions, to be there to, say your piece, to be represented that way is very important. Has it always been like that when you were growing up? And how did you, navigate through that journey from school to being a first jobber before you became a manager and became, an associate director? I'm sure it has not been easy. What was that journey like?
Yeah, I think that where I grew up, my middle school, high school was actually really diverse. And so the cultural shock wasn't really until I got to college where I would be assigned a box, right? People would associate me based on how I looked or what they assumed was who I am because of, my identity. Or if I said, um, I'm Chinese American and I'm also part of an LGBT, advocacy like group, I think people make assumptions and perceptions on what that means. So it's always been finding allies, finding folks that if I can't find the safe space here in my school, in my work, wherever that is, it's building those communities so I can find that safe space. So when you mentioned Bernice, Agents in Advertising, for instance, is definitely one of those spaces, right? Where we don't have to over explain ourselves because other folks get it. They also experience the same thing. They are part of the community, so they understand. So when you're in the room and you're having some of these uncomfortable conversations, it's making sure that you are bringing in others, right? And making room for others, inviting others that represent different diversities and different perspectives than yourself, so that we are sharing ideas across the board, right? Because I don't represent all 40 countries of AAPI either. So, when I don't have an answer, I'm very honest about that. And I say, I know someone else who might be able to chime in. Let's bring them to the table. Let's bring others in to share different perspectives and challenge our thinking.
I love that. The whole context of community, but also at the same time, being authentic if we don't know the answers, and having someone or endorsing someone, sponsoring someone who can help
Absolutely.
find the answers. Because I think observing from how the corporate world has evolved, and especially in the American society we're in, it's very cutthroat, it's very individualistic, it's very, bring your own A game and think about yourself first and foremost. That
Hmm.
was more like how we've seen marketing and advertising. Well, for me, for example, when I was starting
Hmm.
for, over the last couple of decades. What's your take now on how the industry, marketing and advertising, especially for you right now, inclusivity is very important for user experience. In terms of how things have evolved over the last couple of years, is it good? Is it bad? Is it ugly? What's your take on that?
I am always a half full glass person. I don't think that, you can always see things either really, really good or really, really bad. And I think that if you surround yourself with the right folks, with the people who are authentic, who continue to push for change for the better, then it's always going to be a positive outlook for me. And one thing that I do want to call out at the agency I'm at Digitas, we do have multicultural excellence, center of excellence, as well as accessibility center of excellence. And those are the communities that I've proactively reached out to and have tried to push more initiatives with the client work that we do with internal communities as well, right? So again, it's finding that space and finding those communities so that you can then continue to push for the type of work. And it's exciting to me because I'm seeing more companies, more clients asking for work that's inclusive, that's accessible, but they don't know how to do it, right? And that's why they have people like us to help them to figure out, like, challenge their thinking, challenge our own thinking to make it better.
I'm with you on that observation. We're in most brands and clients right now are becoming more aware, or at the very
Hmm.
least, trying their best to be more educated within the context of inclusivity, diversity, belonging. I think for those listeners who may not have a direct understanding of what diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging is all about, or who are not in the field of advertising and marketing, or probably those younger folks who are still finding their way and figuring things out in terms of how they would want to carve their career in marketing communications. Can you give your own take or definition or understanding of what, these great concepts are all about?
Oh man, that's a lot of pressure to explain D and I and A all in one short, concise way, right? But it's really understanding, if you're ever in a space and you are the only that represents that idea, that perception, that identity, D&I is making sure that they feel heard, they have room to echo and voice their opinions, their ideas, and feel safe doing that. And then it's also making sure that there's action coming out of it, right? So it's not just, yeah, okay, we check the box. You're at the table, you're talking about these ideas. Cool, but then we don't do anything about it, right? It's now let's move this forward. We have these great ideas, these diverse ideas. How do we bring this to light? How do we sell this to the client? How do we show them the value that this is? How do we bring in other folks to even expand the perspectives that we're sharing, right? So that it is inclusive, so that it is actionable, that it's equitable moving forward.
That is a great
I hope I
simplified.
did it
I know.
justice.
Well, I know that's very difficult to explain it, but you've put it in a very simple and understandable way. I think, especially for those people who are not in the field, and I think I would want to underline what you've mentioned about call to action, because I think when the concept of DEI started, what we suddenly see on commercials are like, okay, all the colors are represented. All those people who are belonging into different, gender expressions are there, But it's not just a casting brief that we have to tick all those boxes for, but what is the action or what's the kind of emotion that we want to evoke so that we can somehow influence positive change somehow and make this world a little better. No matter how cliche sounding it is, but that's the reality of it, right? And
Yeah,
I
yeah.
think for marketing folks like us, being able to influence that in a good way in this generation at this day and age is a very fulfilling and meaningful kind of career or profession. So going into
Mhm.
what you are doing right now in the agency and the stuff you do in mentorship, what would be the highlights of you feeling this great sense of fulfillment for doing what you do, and why do you do that continuously?
Oh, I mean, when you talk about D&I work, I think that it can be very exhausting when it's just constantly pushing against something that is such a big hill, right? But I go back to having that community and the folks that you can kind of lean on to help push that together. But the type of work I can't go too deep into detail just because of NDA, but I can high level summarize. We've done things in terms of educational pieces for marginalized communities in the financial spaces, right? So, like, how do we talk about home loans? What does that look like? How do we empower women entrepreneurs that come from different marginalized communities and support them in those ways so that they can actually fulfill their dreams, right, of starting a business and be an entrepreneur? Things along those lines. And so, it's also understanding how to plant those seeds with the clients, with our internal teams, so that it's playing the long game. It's not doing one thing and then expecting it to magically just change everything, right? It's a systemic change and it's going to take time. And even when you don't feel like your work is making that impact, you are chipping away at it with so many other individuals around the world, all chipping away at it very slowly, so that eventually we can change the system so that we can make it better for everyone moving forward, especially for those in our future.
That's great. I mean, the fact that, the operative term there for me is like chipping away in different parts of the world because doing a big change cannot be done, overnight. And you can't do it in one go. So it's like slowly, bit by bit. That's what matters. And I think now that we're planting seeds to those younger folks who are listening to this conversation, I know that you're advocating for inclusivity across all disciplines in marketing and advertising. For those folks, younger folks who are still figuring things out in terms of what field they would want to take, why should they go for inclusivity across consumer experience or user experience? Why this field?
Well, I don't think that it's one or the other, right? I think that we all, regardless of what role we play, should be thinking inclusively, right? So it's not just one person owning inclusivity and accessibility work. It's a team effort, and it's just how we do that in the discipline that we are experts in. So, for instance, if I'm talking about user research, it's thinking about making sure we're talking to the right participants and making sure that the participants that we're talking to represent different identities, and that includes accessibility as well, right? So are there screen readers that we're using? Are there participants that are people with disabilities that we can really go through and vet our solutions or ideas, making sure that it's not just one select group that lives within our community that may or may not represent everybody else, right?
And I think for those folks who have already started their career, but on the other side are part of this marginalized sector, like for example, the young cats and the young Josephs. Like for me, if someone could, inspire me and motivate me when I was like 18, 19 years old, Asian, immigrant, gay, who would think that, oh, I don't have a chance to become this because of all those layers of my identity. What would you tell these folks? How would you inspire them?
I think this is why I am doing more speaking engagements, because I think that when I was getting into school, when I was doing my first, second, third job, it was really rare to see another AAPI woman that's vocal, that's out here, right? That's talking about the work in advertising and marketing and what they're doing to help move the needle, to help show other AAPI women, or however you want to identify as, that this is a possibility for us. That beyond just those three careers, right? Doctor, lawyer, and something with numbers, like there are other options and we can be successful at it too.
Yeah, that is great. I think being there to show that, hey, this is actually possible. We are the living
Hmm.
proof that you can reach that dream of yours that seems to be impossible right now. So hopefully, those people who have heard this and can see this conversation will get a little bit more inspired and be enlightened that, hey, it is possible. It's doable. So now,
Absolutely.
yeah, going beyond just your career, because I know that you are playing multiple roles right now. Um, Happy for you to talk about that, but I would want to understand, how do you juggle your multiple life roles? Because in today's generation, the challenges of the world right now, it's just tough. How do you manage that?
Honestly, I ask myself that question quite often. Like, how am I doing all these things? There's only so many hours in a day. And I think that it's understanding that you can't do everything, right? It's figuring out what's my plate looking like today, this week, this month? What are my priorities? What's my focus? And what else am I willing to just let go and not be bothered with certain things, right? So sometimes it's leaning a lot heavier into ongoing education or my career because of specific projects that aren't in time. And other times it's other things that shift, right? It's understanding that it's a give or take, that you can't try to overfill your plate and, you know, not know why everything is failing because you're trying to do too much. So, always doing that gut check with yourself, or even have friends, other folks in your community to kind of gut check you. Like, hey, you're taking on a lot. You feel a little stressed out. Like, what do you actually need to take on today? And really thinking about it in that way.
Yeah, that's so true. Because I think for overachievers like us who would want to do
It's
anything
hard.
and everything,
Yeah.
being brought up in that kind of mindset and culture at home, where you have to overcompensate a lot to be seen as successful. I'm with you. I feel your pain as well sometimes. But what's your
Yeah.
favorite role in your life right now? Is it being, you know, a high flying achiever in the professional world, being a speaker, being a student of life, being being a mother? What's your favorite?
Those are all really good ones, and I do identify with all those labels, but I think my favorite one is definitely being a mother. So we have a 1.5 toddler right now, and he is going through this toddler stage, and as most parents, it's both the most rewarding, but also the most challenging job I have ever had, and it's unpaid. So there's no PTO, nothing, right? So it's definitely the most interesting job I've had. He's keeping me on my toes.
And I'm sure that, I've heard it from a lot of parents, because I myself, I'm an intended parent. I haven't reached that stage yet, but I'm excited. They're saying that
Yeah.
there's no handbook, there's no clear cut guideline or playbook.
Hmm. Yep.
It will just come out naturally.
Yeah, and I think one thing that I think about all the time is, you have to apply agile mentality. So if
Love that.
you try one route and it doesn't work, you got to pivot, and we're just figuring it out. We're building a plane as we're in the air, right? So it's really learn as you go, and you guys are both learning together, right? So like my toddler's learning too, and we're just learning with them.
That's great. Love how you applied the concepts of UX into parenthood.
Yep. Hardest
Um,
project.
That's true. That's true. So now another thing that I would want to touch upon would be, the definition of success coming from, your background before being in the corporate world and being a mother right now. How do you define success, and has it changed over the years?
Oh, it's definitely changed. I think that because we were taught to be overachievers and to do all the things and be really, really good at it, I think success used to mean to me being the smartest, being the hardest working, being the highest at the level that you're at, right? And success could still mean those things. However, I think success for me now, where I am in my life, is really making sure that I'm in a place where I'm still learning and I'm still staying curious and I'm still stretching myself where it's just uncomfortable enough, right? Because that's where you start learning. So it's not necessarily just by title, but it's also by the work that I'm doing, whether I'm making an impact and whether I have the flexibility and the freedom, right? So when I'm at work, I give it 200%. But then when I'm at home, it's also being very intentional on how I spend that time, making sure that I'm very present. And to me, that's success. It's not just defined by my career.
That is beautiful. And I hope that, the young working moms are hearing that right now because, yeah, I fully agree with you. It's like the whole evolution of the concept of success and what that means to everyone. It has to change and it can change.
Hmm.
And it's more inclusive based on the life that we all lead, which I think is very important for us to understand right now. One of the other things that I've noticed that you're doing, which is very noble, is providing mentorship and being intentional about it for those people who are in the marginalized sector. You're focusing on, first and second generation immigrants. What encouraged or pushed you or inspired you to do that?
Well, going back to what we talked about earlier in this conversation, right? It was me being the one and only and realizing that I'm not. There are a lot of others who also felt the same way where they are in their career right now, right? And I wanted to be the mentor that I wish I had when I was first starting. I wanted to be the person that was there to help me work through some of those soft skills. I wanted to be the person that can talk through struggles in projects in terms of dynamics or trying to sell in the value of why we do research or what is UX, right? Like some of those things, or how do we run different types of inclusive thinking and workshops into the strategy that we're building. When you're the only one thinking through all that, and then layering it on top of like inclusive thinking on top of everything else, it's a lot on one person. So I want to be there to be able to offer um, examples of things that I've tried, not to say like this is the only way, but to give you ideas and inspiration so that other folks that I mentor can kind of pick and choose what they feel like would work best for their situation and so that they don't feel as alone. I feel like coaching and mentoring sometimes also feels like therapy, right?
Mhm.
For both directions. So it's nice to be able to give back to folks who are just starting their path in their career. But it's also nice for them to have someone that they can go to be like, I'm really frustrated about the situation. I need some help. And just clarity, right? Someone who can maybe bring new perspectives.
That's great. Um, Out of interest, what are the mentorship themes and topics or challenges of the younger folks today? I'm sure that I have my own topics when I was like, starting my career like 20 years ago. I'm just interested to know if things have changed, if things have developed or got worsened right now. What are the common themes right now that younger folks ask?
I've had questions from all over because individuals that I mentor are at different stages in their career. So the ones who are just entering are really either folks who are just graduating from school or they're pivoting from a different industry altogether. So it's thinking about how do I apply for jobs? How do I stand out? What do I need to do in terms of my resume and my portfolio and practice mock interviews, right? So have questions that I can like come prepared with answers for. I've also worked with folks who are a little further in their career and trying to figure out what the next steps look like. How do I make a career move? What does that mean? Right. And how do I do research to figure that out? If there's not already a career matrix in place in my company, how can I develop one? What does that look like? Things along those lines.
It hasn't really changed massively, but I think there are more colors to it, which is actually good because different interpretations in different situations, given the change in the landscape right now, I'm sure has added more pressure, especially thanks to social media. You get to compare versus your batchmates, for example, or your friends.
Yep.
I'm sure that's an added pressure. But what's your mentorship style like? Um, what's your typical mentoring attitude for all the mentees that you have?
Yeah, I'm very much a believer in leading by example. Um, And as we kind of already talked about, I'm very much a blunt communicator. And so I understand that that's not a style for everyone. But I do call that out when I mentor folks. And when my mentees come to me, they know that I will be there to give them actionable feedback, especially sometimes when it's hard to hear, right? Because that's how we improve, that's how we grow. And they know that I'm there to support them every step of the way. So it's not just me coming and giving constructive criticism and then being like, I'm not going to see you again to see you through this. So it's really making sure that they're continuously growing and pushing for some of those things. And even if it means I have to be um, the harsh critic sometimes to really push them a little further.
Oh, love that concept of tough love. Sometimes that's really needed, especially of today's generation. And I also love the idea that you've mentioned about reverse mentorship, that us being the mentor, um, it's not therapy, but it's therapeutic. I'll be very honest. I feel that way as well. And if I were to advocate for the seasoned and experienced individuals who've gone through a lot of experiences in their career to give back and mentor, that's really super important. It's not only for them, but also for definitely for the people who will be hearing their inputs and insights and their you know overall recommendations based on the journey that they've also had in the past. So for those more seasoned folks, why would we advocate for them to become a mentor, and how would you kind of inspire or push them to become one?
I think the biggest hangup for the hesitation of why people don't do mentorship is they feel like they don't have anything to offer. They don't feel like they've experienced enough to share anything worth sharing. And I don't think that's true. I think that we all have different experiences and we all have different industry experiences that is always nice to hear for other folks to know that one, they're not alone. And two, how did you try to overcome that? Right? Because if I'm trying to figure out a situation and how to navigate through it, sometimes it can be very lonely if you don't have someone else to talk through it with you. So I would recommend anyone who's been in the field for a long time, or not even a long time, someone who's been in the field and feels that they want to give back should mentor. It's a mutually beneficial relationship. You're learning from your mentees as well on the things that you're sharing, and the stories that you're telling and the work that you're doing. Like all those things are skills that you're building onto your soft skills. And so it's definitely mutually beneficial. You're helping folks grow in their career, and they're by default also helping you because they're asking you challenging questions and situations that you're like, I don't know, I've actually never tried the situation, or I've never been in this place, but here's how I would navigate it, right?
For those people who've heard that, if they're not gonna mentor, I don't know why not. Because like literally, it's actually a perfect segue to the last point about our podcast, which is all about mentoring, really understanding why and how life can be more meaningful. And then I think for folks who are seeking self-actualization, who've reached that peak in their career, re-understanding their concept of a meaningful life is super important. So to you, what does a meaningful life mean?
I think I'm living it, if I'm being honest. I think that identifying what I value and how does that trickle in my personal life, how does that trickle in my professional life, that's what is meaningful to me. If I'm not making an impact, then I do yearly reviews of myself, and it's like a reflection, right? And you're thinking about, what have I accomplished this year? What do I want to do more of? And how do I make that happen? What type of impact do I want to make? Right. And making sure that the actions that you do the following year all lead back to that end goal, and having that vision for that and staying, very sharp on that vision. So it's really that.
I'm with you about life planning, evaluating every year. It sounds very methodical. It sounds very
It's
corporate.
being strategic
Yes,
about your life and how you
it
spend the time
helps.
that you have.
Yes, for sure. I enjoyed this conversation, Kat, and I'm sure that a lot of people learned a lot as well. So I want to give the floor to you to share, or to promote anything that you would want to promote in terms of your mentoring, your speakership, or the things that you would want to offer. The floor is yours.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you so much. Like I said, appreciate the time and really had a great conversation today. The two things that I would just love to call out is one, if you're looking for a mentor, I do have availability. Check out adplist.org. If you follow me on LinkedIn, you can also find the link there. And then the second thing is, because we kind of talked about this already, there wasn't a lot of speakers that represent AAPI women and a lot of other identities when I was starting my career. And so I'm pushing myself to be more vocal to amplify my voice a little bit more. So if anyone's looking for additional podcast speakers, panels, at conferences, events, etc., I am available and I would love to connect.
Thank you so much, Kat. It was a pleasure talking to you today. And I hope that you're going to have more exciting opportunities to represent our community and do your part continuously to, like what you said, chip away to make this world a little better. Thank you so much, Kat.
Thank you so much.